Welcome to Rica Subtest 2 online test preparation course presented by ricatest.com. Thank you so much for joining us. In this lesson, you will learn everything that you need to know about Competency 13, providing reading instruction that prepares students before, during, and after reading. In this lesson, we'll build from what we learned in Competency 12 about the foundations of reading comprehension to focus on providing effective instructional strategies to enhance our students' reading comprehension. It is going to be very important for passing your Rica test that you show the test scorers that you know the following reading comprehension instructional framework. First, reading comprehension is best taught in small group instruction, which facilitates optimal reading comprehension for students because this instruction allows for a better chance for all students to be engaged in discussions, which is a key part of any reading comprehension lesson. Second is that the small group instruction is composed of students who share the same instructional reading level. The material that the students read needs to be at their instructional reading level, which, as a reminder, is measured when a student reads aloud 90% or more of the words correctly and answers at least 60% of the comprehension questions correctly. And the last piece of general framework for providing effective reading comprehension instruction is that these small groups, based on reading level, are flexible, meaning that as the students progress through the year, the teacher needs to reorganize the groups based on current reading needs. Next, we have instructional strategies to give before the reading begins. And there are a number of ways to engage students about a text before the reading actually does begin. We will present a short list here and discuss each in detail. Keep in mind that you will want to have the background knowledge for all of these methods on your Rica test in case you're presented with a multiple choice question about one of these strategies. However, you're really going to want to make sure that you're able to describe one of these instructional strategies in detail in case you receive an essay question about it. The first strategy is to model the behavior of what good readers do before reading. This includes the way they handle a book, making sure that the book is upright, reading the title and looking at the front and the back cover, making a prediction based on what this information says or gives us. This also includes opening the book from the front cover, reading the inside pocket sleeve if there is one, and modeling all the ways we can learn about what we're about to read prior to actually reading the story itself. From teacher modeling to previewing the text, the teacher and students can use the information they find to make connections from the text to their personal experiences. We call this text to self, as well as connections from the text to books they may have already read in the past. When this happens, we call this text to text. And lastly, making the connection from the text to the world, which happens when a student connects the text to an event that is happening or has happened in the world. One of our favorite explicit instructional strategies for orienting students to new texts that you can use on your Rica test is using the KWL chart to develop your students' background knowledge. This is where a teacher divides the whiteboard or chart paper into 3 columns with the letters K, W, and L. The acronym stands for What I Know, What I Want to Know, and What I Learned. KWL charts activate students' background knowledge of the topic to be read. For example, if the teacher showcases the book and through previewing techniques discussed earlier, the children see that the front cover has a picture of, let's say, a dinosaur. The students will raise their hands and the teacher will write what they know, what they want to know, and then after they've read the book, what they learned. Finally, another direct way of orienting students to new texts is to set a purpose for the reading that the students will do. Again, these strategies work well interconnectedly. So even if the teacher did use a KWL chart, they can still set a purpose and it would be really good for the students. In this case, the teacher might say, "Today, class, we are going to read about dinosaurs. By the end of the book, you will learn about three different kinds of dinosaurs, their habitats, diets, and where we mostly find their fossils today." Similar to the way we presented instructional strategies before reading, we will now discuss instructional strategies during reading. This is when the children use the graphic features, which might include the title, heading, map, pictures, diagrams, tables, or captions, for example, to better understand the text that surrounds the text and its features. Next is visualizing, and this is a strategy that can be used during reading, which allows the readers to use their imaginations to see the action of the story in their minds. And this is a great practice for children to familiarize themselves with paraphrasing, which is the act of stating that which was read in your own words. This allows students to show how much they can recall and again builds reading comprehension. It also is a good way for predicting, and this happens when the reader makes an educated guess as to what will happen in the story based on the information that they've either already read or from information gathered by looking at the front and back cover. Note taking is teaching students to highlight or make note of the information that seems most relevant based on the purpose of their current reading. If on your Rica test you are presented with an essay question about how to provide explicit instruction that helps students monitor their comprehension during reading, we recommend using the gradual release of responsibility strategy. When using this strategy, first the teacher chooses a target lesson of making a prediction. For an example, the teacher then models the behavior mentioned in the recent slides of, previewing a book and doing a book walk with the children. Then the teacher models a think aloud. And this is a key word that you're going to want to use on your essays and case study of the Rica test is think aloud. For example, here the teacher can say, "I see that the front and back cover both have dinosaurs on them. As I look at the pictures in the book, I see that they are eating and that they lived in different places. I predict that this book is about dinosaurs, and we'll learn where they lived, what they ate, and other facts too." In the second lesson, this next lesson, the teacher will grab a similarly styled book, and together the teacher and the students will read again. They'll look at the covers and they'll do a picture walk again. Then the teacher might say, can someone here make a prediction about what this book will be about? The teacher may add a support such as a sentence starter written on the board. For example, "I predict that this book is about," and then the teacher finds a volunteer student who tries to make a prediction. The student might say, "I predict that this book will be about freshwater fish." If students demonstrated the ability to predict with student support in the lesson, the teacher will release more responsibility to the students in the next lesson. Well, let's have a look at that third lesson. This is the final lesson in this sequence teaching this topic of prediction, where the teacher chooses a similarly styled book once again. And again, the teacher and students look at the book cover, do a picture walk, and this time, before the teacher asks for student volunteers to verbally share their prediction, the teacher instructs the students to open their writer's notebook and write their prediction. Once the students have written their predictions, they can share out, where the teacher notes who is meeting the ability to make a prediction. This process can continue deepening, where eventually the students have their own books and they write and share their predictions of the books that they are reading. This has been an example of using the gradual release of responsibility approach during reading instruction. But keep in mind that this strategy can be used before, during, or after reading. An easy way to remember the gradual release of responsibility method is I do it, we do it, and you do it. This, in the first step, remember, is where the teacher completes the task and the students observe it. The second step here, is the teacher and the students complete the task together with a bit of support from the teacher. And then the third step is where the students complete the task independently in order to demonstrate to the teacher who has mastered this skill. After the student has read or has been read to, the teacher can now assess their understanding by asking the student to summarize or retell what the story was all about. Another fun strategy to use is discussion. Provide a prompt for the students to discuss. During this time, the teacher will walk around and take note of students' ability to answer the questions. The next strategy helps students find connections between the texts they've already read themselves and as well as the world. This is the same concept that was introduced in earlier slides. And lastly, allow students to make visuals to represent and show the stories that they're reading using diagrams, charts, pictures, graphs, and many more. As teachers, we want to help our students transfer comprehension strategies from oral language to written language. Let's talk about how to do this now. We use what's called think alouds. Remember, this is the key term in the Rica test. This is where the teacher models the activity while demonstrating to the students the thought process in order to complete the activity. Effective listening is made up of three parts. First is hearing. This is the volume element, as well as the skill of phonemic awareness. Second is attention. This is the ability to focus on one particular thing while blocking other stimuli. And third is the actual comprehension. This is being able to understand that which was read. You need all three of these in order to process from oral language to written language. After giving oral instruction through a think aloud, the teacher will allow the students to transfer their oral understanding into writing using one of the following ways. Students can either write a summary, illustrate a poster, or answer questions from a worksheet. They can also draw a timeline. Next, let's discuss how to meet the needs of all of our learners, starting with our struggling readers. In this case, we have a few different ideas. And one thing that you can do is you can increase your struggling readers' comprehension by meeting with them one-on-one or in small groups in order to build their word analysis skills. Students can understand orally more than they can read, so we can also take some moments from instruction to read to them directly. Also, struggling readers will absolutely benefit with additional practice. For our English learners, we can spend more time capitalizing on the transfer of comprehension from strategies that they already know in their primary language. We can also explicitly teach comprehension strategies that are currently lacking. And our third set of learners are our advanced learners, who we can support by increasing the pace of complexity of instruction, as well as adding multiple text and building onto their current set of skills and understandings. Next, let's discuss assessment of comprehension. And there are a few moving parts when assessing a student's reading comprehension, so let's talk about this now. There are three sections to complete when assessing a student's reading level. This includes the student's independent, instructional, and frustration reading level. When asking and then gathering information, this all leads to a better understanding for our students' ability to answer literal, inferential, and evaluative types of questions. And then third, observing the student and gathering information for the child's ability to use reading comprehension strategies. Let's review the numbers for students' reading levels. First, a student's independent reading level is reached when the student reads aloud 95% or more of the words correctly and answers 90% or more of the comprehension questions correctly. A student's instructional reading level is reached when the student reads aloud 90% or more of the words correctly and answers at least 60% of the comprehension questions correctly. Then a student's frustration reading level is reached when the child cannot correctly read aloud at least 90% of the words or correctly answer at least 60% of the comprehension questions. For the next section, we'll discuss the three assessment types, which include literal, inferential, and evaluative assessments. Keep this basic framework in mind. For lower elementary students, use a retelling strategy, where the student reads the story aloud or uses a story that was read to them and orally retells the story. Assess upper elementary school students using a three-tiered worksheet or study guide that includes a few literal, inferential, and evaluative questions. Remember that entry-level assessments are used before a unit or chapter has started. A teacher will use an entry-level assessment to understand which students have mastered the content and skills of the topics before it's taught. Next, we have progress monitoring assessment, and this is used in the middle or during a unit lesson. These assessments are informal by nature and are used often, even daily. To build on that further, the way these progress monitoring assessments are conducted is mostly through oral assessments using comprehension checking questions. The teacher, however, will best serve the students by noting student responses in a teacher's journal to keep track of how each student is performing and showing their understanding. This way, the teacher can look back at certain dates with certainty and compare the progress monitoring assessments with the summative assessments. Summative assessments nearly always use writing. These are formal assessments that reveal whether or not a student has met, has not met, or has even exceeded the expectations for the standard being taught. Your Rica test will check your understanding for providing the right type of assessment during a certain period of time of instruction. We have already discussed the process of different types of assessments throughout this lesson, so keep in mind that informal assessments use spoken activities and formal assessments use written activities. The results of every assessment for each standard needs to indicate whether a student's assessment results place that student for that standard at either below expectations, at expectations, or exceeding expectations. Keep in mind that the Rica test scores want you to understand that teachers do not haphazardly create lessons. Instead, they create lessons systematically through the results they collect based on assessment. Furthermore, teachers use the assessments to create individual student profiles. These show each standard taught and the student's benchmark score for that standard. Then, the teacher takes the individual profiles to create the class profile, which is the one file that is in the collection of all of the individual student profiles, and it indicates how effective instruction and activities has been in teaching the whole class. Based on the profiles, the teacher then uses the data to systematically plan effective reading instruction, where the teacher can adjust instruction and provide differentiated instruction to meet the needs of all independent and individual students. Finally, the teacher reassesses to determine whether or not the relevant standards have been achieved. Before we complete Competency 13, there was a lot learned in this lesson, so let's recap the key takeaways. First, explicit instructional strategies for orienting students to new texts. So this is prior to reading the book. We use teacher modeling, we use prediction, graphic features, we activate background knowledge using KWL charts, and we discuss and we predict what we think will happen. Next, we learned explicit instructional strategies to support students during their reading process. And for that, we pay particularly close attention to the graphic organizers. We use visualizing, paraphrasing, again, predicting, summarizing, and note-taking. And finally, you learned explicit instructional strategies for supporting students' comprehension after reading. And in learning this, we learned that what we do to support our students is we use summarizing, retelling, as well as making a connection, whether that's text to self, text to text, or text to the world. We also use pictures, maps, Venn diagrams, and other graphic organizers and representations in order to better understand what we just learned. Fourth, in this lesson, you learned explicit instructional strategies for promoting students' development of listening comprehension skills and helping our students transfer comprehension strategies from oral language to written language, which we used think alouds and modeling. Our fifth learning point here was how to meet the needs of all learners. In order to support our struggling readers, we focused on building word analysis skills. Fluency, vocabulary, academic language, and background knowledge, all to support their reading comprehension. In order to provide differentiated comprehension instruction to meet the needs of our English learners, we learned that we capitalize on their first language understanding, as well as directly and explicitly teaching them comprehension strategies that are still lacking. Next, to provide differentiated instruction to meet the needs of our advanced learners, We can increase the pace of instruction. We can make projects more complex. We can build on and extend these learners' current set of knowledge and understanding. Finally, we learned about the 3 different kinds of assessments, which include entry level, monitoring of progress, and summative assessments. Next, we learned about the major difference between the informal and formal assessments, in that informal assessments, which include monitoring of progress assessments, are given orally, whereas formal assessments, which include entry level and summative assessments, are given in a written format. And our final learning point from this lesson was that we teachers do not haphazardly create lesson plans. We assess in order to analyze and find out who is meeting, not meeting, or exceeding the expectations so that we can create differentiated lesson plans to meet the needs of all of our learners. Thank you so much for joining in this Rica Test lesson. When you're ready, go ahead and take the Competency 13 quiz to check your understanding of this test material